Hey, everybody, this is Jason Wilson with the Curious About Cannabis podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in once again. So today I'm delighted to be talking to the founder of Goldleaf, who you might know initially from their patient journals. Now there are all sorts of different scientific print materials they're doing, but I'm with Charles McElroy. Thanks so much, Charles, for being willing to come on the podcast today.
Absolutely. Yeah, happy to be here, Jason.
Awesome. Yeah. So for anyone that is maybe not so familiar with Goldleaf, do you mind doing just a very brief description of what the company is, what your focus is, and then we'll kind of go a little bit backwards and talk about how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, awesome. So Goldleaf is a science-forward print company specifically for the cannabis community. We make educational prints, one part infographic, one part artwork, as well as other educational materials, mostly in the form of journals, cards, and other kind of like tactile things that you can print.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've been really stoked to see how the company's grown over the years. I was just saying before we started recording that I've been following Goldleaf ever since like the very first version of the patient journal came out, which I was so stoked to see. So needed.
Cool. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, go for it.
Well, no, it's funny. It's 2020 now, and it feels like Goldleaf is still so new, but we're technically 4 years old. So
yeah,
time really flies.
Yeah, I know, right? It just melts away. It's crazy, especially in this industry with everything being so chaotic and so much going on all of the time. It really helps the time pass.
Yeah, that's true.
And my understanding is that Goldleaf is not your first entrepreneurial endeavor. Is that right?
That's correct. I kind of cut my teeth in the entrepreneurial world with a different startup that was a sustainable clothing company. We mostly made jeans. And then kind of got into knits and stuff. And what was unique about that, apart from kind of the sustainable angle, was that we were able to successfully source everything within our region here in America, so the Midwest.
Oh, very cool.
We utilized these old factories that used to make Levi's pre-NAFTA in Tennessee. We worked with an expat, meaning ex-Patagonia employee, who started a new organic dye house in North Carolina. We got our organic cotton from Georgia. It took us a few years to kind of put together that supply chain, but I always felt that was one of the coolest things about Noble. They weren't the items weren't for everybody. It was kind of a premium product. We did bespoke items, but there was a lot of operational challenges, and that's kind of my sweet spot. That's kind of how I got to know product development, and it definitely kind of laid the groundwork for what I do with Goldleaf. Having that care and attention in the quality of the materials, the product side, as well as being okay with spending extra time, attention, and kind of love into your product, so that you can be happy with it, and you can hopefully positively impact people. A nice clothing item is so different from what we do at Goldleaf. But Goldleaf is definitely, probably my brainchild and my passion, where Noble was my business partner's passion. But it was still a wonderful experience, and it definitely kind of shaped my approach with how I went about building Goldleaf.
Yeah, and have you always been sort of attracted to like business management and entrepreneurial stuff like that?
Honestly, I wasn't really exposed to it. But it certainly meets my my personality, like, spot on. I do my best work when it's something that I care about and I'm passionate about.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody probably says that, but so before Noble, I was worked in the music industry and was an audio engineer, which is one of the
Very
reasons
cool.
why I asked Jason about his microphone. But yeah, I realized that that was really hard for me because I did not like working on or engineering projects when I did not like the music or I didn't like the band.
Yeah.
It was like pulling teeth. It was worse than like a
Like torture.
cubicle job or
Yeah.
something, you know? So I think that that kind of goes in hand with being in the entrepreneurial space because you are working on something that you care about and that is yours and you're cutting your own path. So that resonated with me, and you know that's kind of stuck with me. That's why I'm still doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, totally. And it seems to be going well from what I can tell. And how did you end up sort of pivoting towards this cannabis space? Like, what did that sort of journey look like once you, was there overlap with Noble when you started having the idea for Goldleaf, or what did that transition look like?
There was a little overlap, but uh, not really that much. I didn't really dive headfirst into Goldleaf until after we had decided to step away from Noble. I'd mentioned it was kind of the passion of my business partner, and he just got burned out and wanted to move on. So he asked me if I wanted to kind of take the reins, and I really didn't without him. So that was kind of the wind down, and that's when he kind of gave me the affirmation to push forward with the Goldleaf idea that I'd been kicking around with him for a while. My relationship with cannabis goes back quite a while, and so the decision to get into the space was not one that I made on a whim or made on the just saying like, oh, everybody's talking about this being like a green revolution and like a new industry that is the first time it's happened in, like a lifetime. That stuff was just noise. It didn't really affect my decision. I've like I said, I've always kind of worked in the cannabis space, not professionally, but as an activist, as an advocate. I've seen the potential of it therapeutically with family growing up. I've just kind of always been around it. It was somewhat normal. And I think the thing that's always still rubs me wrong is the way that it's kind of seen by so many people still. The emotional baggage attached to it, whatever it may be. And so that's why I liked Goldleaf, is because it has 1 foot in of the cannabis space and 1 foot out, and it kind of allows us to take that conversation, assist in that normalization, that deprogramming in like the best possible way. Like I wanted to use something that I was good at, which is design and in a way shaping perception, to make help make the cannabis space seem more legit, more, I get, not to keep using this term, but more like science forward and, acceptable. I think science is the olive branch that a lot of people will accept when they kind of learn about cannabis and learn about the potential there.
Yeah, exactly. And helping to like overcome the stigma to try to like push better conversations forward.
Exactly.
Yeah. And what were some of the lessons that you took from your prior experiences with Noble that those sort of like major light bulb moments that you then carried on to how you built and managed Goldleaf?
Yeah, it's not that complicated, but the simplest way I could put it is just highly value good design. That it's people will judge something very quickly, and if your photography, your branding, your website, your box, whatever it may be, is kind of poorly done or poorly conceived, they'll judge you on your weakest link. And so with Goldleaf, I tried to always make sure that everything we presented to the world was done in a way that was, in tune with the rest of it. And that's something I definitely learned from Noble, which did create higher end products. Again, I mentioned this before, but, putting that design as like kind of like one of the main hallmarks, and being okay with spending time and spending extra money to make it a little better.
Yeah.
Goldleaf stuff is certainly not for everybody. It's for those people who are either maybe working in the industry, maybe they're just passionate about it. They like to nerd out on the science behind things, whether it be the medical side, the cultivation side. And so we make stuff for those people. And because that niche is so small, I feel like it affords us a little bit more capacity to kind of like go all in with those design elements, and take those chances without worrying about alienating anybody.
Yeah, and for anyone listening that's not familiar with Goldleaf, the style is very slick, kind of like a minimalistic, very nice kind of modern style, which is cool to see. And dispensaries and other companies in the cannabis industry are starting to adopt these things. I'm starting to see posters and stuff around, which is cool because it does, getting on this track of affecting perception. That's a huge part of this process of trying to steer the ship away from all of the stigma and try to kind of, I don't know, lower those guards down a little bit so that people can engage these things in a more kind of mature way. And so I've been really happy to see that. It's very professional, very, very slick, which is cool. And what was I know the patient journal came early on, but was that one of the first things that you did, or what were the first prints that you did?
Yeah, the first product that we released was some of our cultivation stuff. It was the Grow Jotter.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was the first one we did, shortly followed by the Planner, which is like the bigger brother version. And I kind of conceived of the medical side as like kind of the cornerstone of Goldleaf, but I really wanted to get it right. And so, the first edition took a year to develop. I passed it through the hands of lots of experts in the space, different doctors, RNs, people who are working in the space, either as like a bud tender or like a business owner.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get that right out of the gates. Of course, nothing's perfect. We're on our 12th edition of the patient journal. But so that one was kind of quietly getting developed in the background, while the cultivation stuff was a little bit more straightforward. The information and the approach to those journals is obviously very different. And it's not that much of a mystery.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things specific to cannabis gardens that we wanted to like capture and educate on, but that information is a lot easier to kind of find and digest. Whereas the medical side, as you know, it's very fractured. So we had to, vet sources, make sure we were, focusing on like the right approach. And we do need to get it right. We don't make recommendations like, well, we'll recommend something like, we recommend that you pay attention to your body.
Right.
Stuff like that. But we're not saying like, we recommend that you start with 5 milligrams or something. Like that is just not what we do.
Yeah.
So educating people about the bigger picture for cannabis is quite an endeavor. Especially when you're making something that is intended to be somewhat universal.
Mm-hmm.
So in a lot of the work we do now, we do a lot of B2B stuff, like so customizations. The vernacular that we have to adopt for a client in Canada is wildly different from what we'll do for somebody in Oklahoma or even California.
Mm-hmm.
They'll use slightly different words. Some different words you're not allowed to use. Mm-hmm. For example, in Canada, they much prefer serving to dosing.
Yeah.
Simple things like that to make it compliant. So we've had to learn a lot about the different compliancy issues with whether it be Canada versus the U.S. or different states in the U.S. So yeah, for that reason, we kind of released our cultivation, our grower stuff first, and kind of used that as a test case to see if people liked this like guided approach to journals,
Right.
and they liked the infographic nature of like artwork. I always loved that stuff, and it was still surprising to see how many people resonated with it within like this very specific group of people in the cannabis space. But yeah, it's really affirming and awesome to kind of see and know that these that what we make is well received and it is enjoyed by people who do like to kind of nerd out on the data side of things a little bit.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah. People like me that love seeing. I love a good graphical representation of some complex idea or scientific topic or something. Like, yeah, that's always something that gets me excited. And
yeah, me
it's
too.
important. I mean, as an educator, the need for good design like this is so critical, because I mean that's something where like I fall incredibly short, and so I rely on people like yourself to take this information and be able to rearrange it, put it in a form that then someone walking by sees a poster and all of a sudden they're digesting information that they don't even have to necessarily read words. Sometimes just the layout, the way that things are structured on the poster is already communicating a lot, and that goes a long way to
Yeah.
help people like myself that are doing education, to be able to help reach people sometimes if I'm having trouble kind of communicating or illustrating a certain concept. So I have a lot of appreciation for what you're doing in that regard, for sure.
Cool.
And so I know now you've got other things, like you have a cooking journal,
Mm-hmm.
and also the cannabis taster. So sort of like a user journal that's not necessarily so focused on the medical,
Right.
um, which has been really cool. So can you describe a little bit of the differences between these journals and kind of what people can expect if they were to get one?
Yeah, happy to. So at Goldleaf, we've kind of learned to break up our product releases into kind of three camps,
Yeah.
three like subject bases. So like wellness, cultivation, and then experience based. And that's kind of where the cannabis taster and cooking journal fit in. So the cannabis taster is kind of meant to be that item that you put in your backpack or suitcase when you go visit like Oregon or Colorado for like a Canna tourist thing, or if you just enjoy it. I know the term recreation is kind of mixed anymore.
Sure. Yeah.
Adult use, whatever you want to call it. People who are more after the enjoyment. So like somebody who's going to visit different wineries or going on a brewery tour or something. And that's a lot of folks. And so the cannabis taster kind of focuses on that, the different terpenes, the flavors, the aromas, the experiences that you have from it. Personally, I don't think there's a great difference between like somebody who uses cannabis for like therapeutic medical reasons versus a recreational reason. Those lines are very blurry. I know that. But that said, like folks who don't have a condition that they're using cannabis for will probably get more enjoyment out of it, just because that's the reason that they're using it.
Yeah.
And so that's what the taster is kind of meant to be a companion for. Whereas the cooking journal is kind of like a guided templated journal for cooking with cannabis that a lot of people love to experiment with. That's some people's preferred delivery method. There's a lot of great devices out there like the Levo or the Magic Butter Machine or something. And so this is kind of meant to be a helper for those folks. There's two sections in it. One for like your extraction recipes, where you'll make your infused olive oil or your butter or whatever. And then the other type of recipe, which would be like your lasagna recipe or whatever you're making. And then there's helpful info in there about, shelf life of different fats, decarboxylation, And my favorite part is like the terpene flavor pairings. So what wines would pair well with certain terpenes, or what dishes naturally pair well, whether it be like fish or white fish or certain herbes de Provence or something like that.
Yeah.
So that was a fun project, and we worked with a really great expert, the herb sommelier, Jamie Evans. She's, I think, probably the possibly the world's foremost expert, maybe just this hemisphere. I'm not sure, but that's what she does, and it was really fun working with her and learning a bit more for my part on those types of flavor pairings, and then practicing some of them in our home to see what we thought of them.
Yeah, and that's really cool that you're hitting all of these different niches, and it makes you wonder. Like, there are now these like cannabis tour groups, in Oregon and Colorado and Washington and stuff, and I wonder if hopefully if they're listening to this, they become aware of like the cannabis taster, because that'd be a really cool thing to partner with that, to like give to people if they're going on these tours and trying so many things, or like some of these events. The Cultivation Classic, all these other things where it would be nice for people to have, something like that, so they can actually keep track of everything. So it'll be highly unlikely they'll be able to remember everything that they that they try.
Yeah, that's the challenge.
Yeah, that's super fascinating. And who are you mentioned that when you were developing the patient journal that you pass it around to a lot of different doctors and RNs and things. Do you have like an active scientific advisory board, or do you have like a network of folks that you reach out to?
Yeah, we have both, kind of. So so many of the things we do are just hyper specialized. An expert in say like the brain or something wouldn't obviously be a great choice to run something by that's in the recreation or cultivation side. So depending on the topic, we'll normally connect with a specific expert on the topic. So some examples of that, like different art prints we do, normally we'll take like a sort of niche subject and then even get smaller, like microdosing, or talking about the different terms and I guess efficiencies and all that stuff of dabs and concentrates. A doctor that we'd work with for maybe the patient journal, or some like cannabinoid research would probably have nothing to say for that concentrates piece. So that's one thing I actually have found that I really like, is we can be pretty fluid and meet and talk with all these different experts. Like we're connecting with a couple different hemp growers for a piece that we're working on for that kind of dives into the differences between like what people know as hemp or marijuana versus full cannabis sativa. And it's kind of all about the misnomers surrounding the word choices of that stuff, and biologically what is going on. So those are growers who work with like high CBD, what they would call like hemp plants. All that said, we do have somebody on our team who is our content czar, we call him.
Nice.
He's great. He's got a background in research, has his MLS, and is kind of charged with making sure that our sources are all vetted. We try to only kind of utilize primary source material. And so he's helpful on that front. Additionally, and this was kind of like the hard part that we had to solve, there's always new research happening, new things are learned, new things are coming out. What I remember being kind of the doctrine in 2016 is no longer something that you'll even say. And, depending on where you are in the country, they're either just learning about that now as truth, or it's a 4-letter word that you don't even say in this place, Like, so if you're talking Southern California versus, Kentucky.
Oh yeah.
Very different levels of understanding of things. So another thing that Alfonso will kind of assist with our versioning, making sure like, okay, we learn this difference with how we're explaining, myrcene or something. We mentioned that in the patient journal. We mentioned that in these two infographic prints, and then these like educational pamphlets. So we have to update it in all of those places.
Yeah.
So he's kind of charged with keeping us up to scuff there. We also work with Eminent Consulting in Oregon for certain topics. They're a great group. I'm not sure if you run into them, Jason. I know that. So Emma Chasen is one of them. She's like a pretty great educator based in Oregon. And so we'd had a lot of requests for breast milk information. Is using cannabis while nursing a danger? What do we know about that? Mm-hmm. And so our team was not able to find anything like validated or verifiable. Yeah, exactly. So that's when we would connect with them, kind of give them the assignment to research that and see what valid sources they could find and what the recommendations would be as far as like deliverable content that we can design around, or explain around. And our findings were that there just isn't enough to do anything meaningful, so we didn't do that project. A lot of people wonder about that, myself included, but we really value one of the things that Goldleaf does well, I think, is take that extra step to make sure everything is valid. That's the problem we're solving. So I want to make sure that we're solving it and not just making more confusion. And ethically, we're not going to release something that we can't, validate.
Yeah. Exactly.
So that was a case of one that never got off the ground, but is there standing by in case there's some studies that are released that do have, information or an interesting finding that we can kind of showcase in a way that is helpful to people.
Yeah, that's really refreshing, that approach, because I mean, as you know, the education in the cannabis space, there's a huge spectrum of quality, and it's something I've mentioned before that some of our listeners are probably going to say, "Oh, you're going to talk about this again." But there's a concept in science education that when it comes to science education, learners and the public in general tend to want science to provide answers. And there's usually an assumption among the public that there are more answers out there than there actually are. Mm-hmm. And they tend to view people that can provide answers as authority. It's an issue in politics as well, that if someone's willing to just state something as a fact, a lot of people, accept that and feel good about that. Whereas when you say, oh, we don't have a lot of information, don't quite know, it's sort of ambiguous, people feel a little more uncomfortable with that uncertainty. Yeah. But the path towards high quality science education is you have to embrace that what we don't know and that uncertainty and everything. And when the data's not there, you have to say, we don't know. And, and press forward and come back to it. And the issues around cannabis and pregnancy and fertility and breastfeeding and all of that is one of those big dark areas where we don't have a lot of information. There's some interesting studies that have gone on that have shown some possible correlations, but then you see other studies that totally contradict those other findings. And so I'm really happy that that's kind of your policy. And I imagine because I know just from some of my work and a lot of writing that I do and everything, that issue of things changing constantly and having to update things, I imagine that you're having to issue things in kind of small batches.
That's even the term that we use. Yeah. We do small batch productions for that exact reason. I mentioned like the 12th iteration of the patient journal. Mm-hmm. Not all of that is like, oh, we got to update this fact. There are some of those, sure, but in that case, some of them are like the layout and the UX of it.
Yeah.
We get feedback from some of our like medical partners, like, hey, people are confused about this section. How are you recommending you fill it out? And little things that seem obvious to one group, but is totally out there for another. So we'll make those changes as we go, and that's one of the benefits of doing small batches, is that we can be kind of nimble when we have to like update something. There's not like 20,000 books sitting in a warehouse somewhere that are going to get recycled. Yeah, I mean, apart from some of the, I guess, like pens and writing accoutrement that we have, almost everything is made in small batches. And so that's basically two jobs at Goldleaf that most companies, even in the print space, wouldn't need to have. We've got, the content czar person, and then we've got the kind of like the inventory manager that just needs to act quick and assist with those like reorders when we see the need for it. And then connect with the product devs to make sure, like, hey, is this the latest version? Are there any changes with this iteration? Can we go to print with this? So it's kind of fun. Like that was I enjoyed dialing in that part with Goldleaf, but it does sometimes feel like a lot of effort for very small things.
Sure, yeah. Well, and the hope too is that at some point those changes kind of become less and less frequent as things kind of start to get dialed into an optimum,
yeah,
whatever. So, maybe in like 5 years, you won't
right.
have these small batches anymore. What's some of the feedback you've gotten? We'll kind of break it down because you've got so many different things, starting with the patient journal. What's some of the feedback you've gotten from both patients and clinicians that have worked with that and experienced it?
Yeah, I would say like the most like meaningful feedback is just that it does make the whole process less intimidating to people. Our approach to these journals is to not really show any stoner culture visuals, not lean on those old terms. So we're using the scientific vernacular, or we're explaining what the term is. And that kind of clinical approach, but, also kind of elegant, like we do have that like kind of hipper modern look to them. It does diffuse their worries a little bit. And it does kind of, I guess, illustrate the importance of self-reliance as a patient. A lot of patients are used to going to your doctor and saying, I have this problem. What prescription are you giving me? How much should I take? How often? Tell me that straight up answer without any variation. And that's just not how cannabis works. So everybody has to learn that. And you have to, for probably the first time for most, you have to be okay with experimenting with your body.
Yeah.
It's just how it is. It's not that you're a hippie in the 60s hearing that phrase that you see in film and stuff like, oh, we're just experimenting. You got to
Right.
get that out of your mind and think of yourself as like a little laboratory. And there's no real danger to these experimentations. At worst, you'll have like a uncomfortable evening.
Right.
But at best, you'll feel amazing. So, that seems to be why a lot of doctors and clinicians like reach out to us, is they want to encourage their patients to journal, to be mindful of their own therapy, but they don't want to develop something themselves. We hear a lot of people who do try to develop something themselves and realize how big of an endeavor that is. So they'll connect with us to either buy some either via wholesale, or very often they'll want to add a little bit of their own branding on it. A lot of these doctors' offices, especially in I guess, well, I'm not sure how California is structured right now, but at least in the Midwest, you're kind of going to be an outlier as a physician who works with cannabis. And, for that reason, they're not going to be part of larger medical groups. So they're kind of business people too. I know that's kind of a dangerous waters you're getting in there, but for the most part, I don't think these physicians are going to be going down this route unless they do believe in the success of this type of therapy, because it's more profitable not to a lot of the times. But, for them to want to be able to have that quick contact info back to them, or have their own brand on like one of our journals, that's definitely something we provide. They seem to like it for that reason. It's, the patients are interacting with these journals for normally like 2 to 4 weeks. And then, honestly, I kind of feel like if you haven't learned what you're hoping to learn in that increment, there might be more going on. So, that I know that's not a good salesy thing for me to say, but
No,
we
just
don't have,
realistic.
yeah, right. It's as simple as that. Like, sure, you can have other things come up. Like, I myself struggle with autoimmune problems, and my symptoms have changed throughout my life.
Yep.
So I can see a value of coming back to a journal and be like, all right, I'm gonna, use the scientific method and start again and see if there's any differences that have changed in my body in the last 5 years. But for most people, you're going to have a pretty safe baseline of understanding at that point. And while journaling is still beneficial for a lot of other reasons, it's not necessarily going to be the one that's like, the main reason is not going to be what actionable stuff can I glean from maybe these different delivery methods or these different dosing sizes. Mm-hmm. It might just be like, it helps me to, unplug, write something down.
Yeah.
It helps me remember, and it helps me not be so anxious about it all. Yeah. That is totally cool too. So yeah, your original question, what are kind of the physicians saying? It's kind of that. It's they want to encourage their patients to do the journaling for one of those reasons. And, we're often like one of the easier ways to make that happen in still kind of like a nice way.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one thing that I always find interesting about cannabis is its propensity to, oh, hello, kitty cat.
Yeah.
At first, when I first heard the meow, I thought it was my cats because my cats are like right outside the door.
Okay. Yeah, he wants to go outside.
Yeah, he wants to be on the podcast too. Yeah. One thing I love about cannabis is that it tends to connect people to sort of larger concepts that go beyond cannabis, and this using a journal to become more self-aware about how something that you're choosing to engage is affecting your body, and
Mm-hmm.
your health conditions and stuff is something that I think is really exciting because this can be applied to anything. It can be applied to foods and dietary supplements, all sorts of different things. And it'll be interesting to see if the conversation, kind of starts to expand, well outside of cannabis, and we start to see more sort of like wellness journaling in general. I guess maybe that's a term to use for that, but
right.
Yeah. So that's something I find really exciting. And what about the grower journal? Because that was one of the first things that you put out. What was the feedback you got from cultivators about that?
Yeah, people who like to already journal in the garden. I think like our journal supplies like find the hobbyist and like the mid-sized grows. That's where they go. Yeah. They're not going to like any larger commercial facilities. Sometimes those are digitized, and we're not trying to compete with that. We're just trying to one part educate, one part like facilitate. Yep. And yeah, so a lot of states that have like home grow ability or home grow provisions in their laws, or for people who have like these smaller grow operations, they're either already keeping a journal or they want to be better at keeping a journal. Right. So the idea there is that you're just kind of more easily tracking stuff in your garden. And I say more easily because we have this templated approach to give you cues on what things you should be recording.
Yeah.
Like, what's your IPM today? Is this, are you coming close to where you shouldn't be taking any more clones or any more topping or anything like that? Just those little cues to help somebody visualize and plan the full cycle of their garden from the various phases. A lot of time is given to like the nutrient programs that anybody would use. But basically it's akin to any specialty journal you'd have. It's just made for cannabis gardeners. So the terms, the information, the cues are all wrapped around like that pursuit, rather than just a plain blank journal or something. And I would imagine somebody who's been gardening for 10, 20 years, they probably are fine with either a blank journal or just like a laminated piece of paper that right. That's like their holy grail, yep. for repeating their success. But the fact is that like a lot of people are new to this still. The people who aren't new to it want to get better. Like I found that I really actually like doing this. It's therapeutic to be in the garden and to watch this stuff grow. And I know the source of my medicine. How can I make this better? And this is made for that, for helping those people understand what factors can actually make their grow better.
Yeah, and my experience between myself and friends of mine that are cultivators and everything, I've seen the highly disorganized notebooks that are floating around, and friends that'll say, "Oh, I know I did such and such," trying to flip through, trying to figure out like where that information. It's like they know the information's recorded, but trying to find it and use it can be challenging. So I imagine one of the big value adds is just that forcing that level of organization so that you can actually interact with your information better. And,
exactly.
And with laws changing across the country, we're going to have more and more people that have been interested in cannabis but didn't want to take the risk of getting into growing, whether it be closet growing or actual like gardens, that now are going to be getting into that. And for those hobbyists that really love it, I imagine it's going to be a very valuable tool, and that, like you pointed out, that demographic is actually going to expand over time. So that's really cool. I can, just from personal experience, I can see why that would be extremely valuable. Yeah.
Cool.
And one thing I wanted to ask you is, throughout the past 4 or 5 years that you've been working on this, how has your sort of perspective around cannabis evolved? Because like you pointed out, in like 2015, 2016, it was a very different world compared to now in 2020, just as far as what we understand and some of the memes and knowledge that's floating around. So can you speak a little bit to that, just how your own perception about cannabis has evolved?
Yeah. When I started in on it, I'm based in the Midwest. I've spent time out west and in the South. But my family's all in Ohio, so that's where I kind of chose to settle. And that does shape your perception on things. It seemed like a dangerous choice when I started Goldleaf in 2016, because it was still pretty new. Like I'm trying to think what states did have provisions at that time. I think it was just kind of the big ones, and generally the overall like zeitgeist of the country hadn't started shifting and adopting like pro cannabis stances yet.
Yeah.
But at this point, it feels like that's a majority. Like I work with a lot of people in our state for support stuff, like lawyers and accountants and delivery drivers for like shipping stuff. And these are folks who are like conservatives, and I tell them what we do. I don't want them to feel like they're being tricked or anything. So they're like, what company do you work for? And I tell them, and I tell them what we do. And I've never once had anybody give me like the eye roll or anything like that. Like, it's very positive. Like even in, conservative states, I think the sentiment toward it has shifted and continues to shift to where I think it's going to be hard to find people who are against it, and those there may even be the same amount of people who are like against alcohol or something.
Yeah.
So that's been the biggest thing I've noticed since I've been working with Goldleaf is just over time people are just getting more and more accepting, and that's refreshing.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you know or not, but I'm originally from Mississippi and grew up in the South my whole life. I moved out to Oregon about 7 years ago or so. I've been extremely surprised to see how much has changed in the southern states since I left. Now, when I talk to people back home and tell them what I do and what I'm involved in and everything, I've had the exact same experience where I expect like some scoffing or jokes to be made, or whatever, and or a more negative response, of like people actually, having that stigma come up and really putting up a wall. But I've been really pleasantly surprised that people that I never thought would voice support for cannabis have, sort of accepted that. And the widespread sort of change around hemp has really helped with that, as people have learned about CBD and they realize that these plants, it's all the same plant and different chemical profiles, and that really goes a long way to kind of break that. But even with around the topic of THC, I've noticed that the people that are really vehemently against it, it's getting harder and harder to find those people. They're few and far between these days, which is it's kind of amazing how fast that happened.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you bring up THC. I think like that is actually going to be the next hurdle. I've worked with a lot of companies like this, and we do get requests for like white label and like custom work. So we do like custom infographics and stuff, and they want us to show how THC-free CBD products are superior to full spectrum, and they're not really. So we don't do those, but I see their existing branding, their existing messaging, and it's all about them being based in a place like Kentucky, where that's the only thing that they can sell and they can produce there. So if they want to broadcast like this was grown in our home state and it's the superior health stuff, it's great for sleep and stress, and this snake oil basically, that's probably a harsh term, but you get my point. They can lean on anything that people have said about cannabis and say that this is the same, just without the THC.
Right.
And they're just totally missing it. And I think that as this business grows, it's definitely been harder to regulate. That's going to be the next challenge, is now deprogramming like bad medical advice from businesses, not from, doctors and stuff. And that's my worry. And I kind of see like the THC argument. Like, I know exactly what you're talking about. People have been adverse to it, and then they're like, maybe it's not so bad. And I kind of see the danger of them thinking like, you don't even need it. Why even have it?
Right. Yeah. Well, and it's funny. Kentucky's one of these places. It's good you brought that example up, because hemp had been going on in Kentucky for a long time. And I remember being at a cannabis science conference back in, it might have been 2016 or 2015. And I heard someone from Kentucky present, and they were talking about how they isolate THC and remove it from CBD extracts. And at the time, I mean, there were people doing that, but people in Kentucky specifically had been doing that for a while, of trying to figure out how to make these THC-free products. And so in a way, they were like a leader in some of this extraction technology
Yeah.
and how it was used. But in another sense, the point you're bringing up is it's forcing a market to produce a product that may be inferior to products that are allowed to at least have a little bit of THC in them.
Right.
And ideally, it's going to be interesting to see how the hemp thing plays out, because even like the 0.3% limit, now that the Farm Bill has defined that as total THC, and states are kind of like resisting adopting that for as long as possible. But once they have to, I had a really good interview. I haven't released it yet, but an interview with Kevin McKernan from Medicinal Genomics. And, he was basically presenting the case that it may not be biologically possible to have crops that are going to succeed in that environment. Because even if you were to remove the gene responsible for producing the enzyme that would produce THCA, enzymes are not perfect. So like the genes are not perfect. So the genes for CBCA and for CBDA, they can produce THCA as well. And it's not hard to hit that 0.3% threshold. And so then you get into these games where you're like, well, I have to harvest early. I have to, do these different things to try to hit it. And really the rational response would be, we need to bump that number up, and we need to have a serious discussion of like, how much THC could we allow without presenting some sort of public health risk in these products, especially if they were to get to kids or something like that.
Yeah, right. Kind of like the alcohol content in like a candy or
or kombucha or something.
Exactly, right.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good analogy. Yeah, it's like even in the alcohol space, we allow small amounts of alcohol in some products that a child very well might drink. But it's in those concentrations that generally don't have to worry about negative adverse effects. But
right.
Yeah. And on this note of like watching the industry and where it's going and everything, and your personal interest in it, what do you hope to see over the next let's just say 5 or 10 years, especially like in the Midwest where you are in Ohio? Because I know the laws have changed substantially just in Ohio over the past few years.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm just personally interested what the cannabis environment is like in Ohio, and what do you kind of hope to see over the next several years as it evolves?
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer like the general stuff, and then I'll tell you how Ohio's doing right now.
Yeah.
So generally, I think the best thing for everybody will be to cleanly just decriminalize. I think descheduling cannabis entirely will do so much for the business side of stuff. I mean, that'll open the gates. I mean, this is the reason, at least, that so many banks, insurers, credit card processors won't touch it, because they could risk their like federal insurance. So if you change that, then that will make it like a true white hat business.
Yeah.
Where you don't have to use like these credit card processors that have 10% swipe rates or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And moreover, like, so we have so many we're seen as somebody who produces cannabis like by the internet. So we're straddled with like red tape and problems with Google and Pinterest and Amazon and everybody. It's not really any different. Just because those words exist on our site, the bots flag them. And there's no central people in charge in these companies anymore. Like if you want to talk to somebody at Google or somebody at Amazon or Facebook, it's going to be a small department somewhere else in the world. You'll never get them on the phone again if you do in the first place. And there's nobody that they can say like, this guy had a good point. Can we fix this for him? There's no central decider. And so they just need to change their algorithms and stuff. And that's only going to happen if there is, the change to the schedule of cannabis in general. So that's the number one thing I hope happens. The legalization thing, I mean, I'm perfectly content to to have people leave that up to the states. I think that almost every state will adopt it pretty quickly once they see, the dollar signs in their eyes for tax revenue. And so I kind of see as that being like a domino effect with the descheduling. I don't think the feds need to necessarily legalize it outright, although, if they want to, they can. It just seems like that'd be a chaotic way to do it, even for somebody who's like pro-cannabis reform and stuff. So that's kind of like what I hope to see in preferably the somewhat near future. And then, like you see that domino effects with the states. Places like Ohio will just have to throw out the model that they have. So the way it is in Ohio right now is kind of depressing, at least for a company like Goldleaf. It's not a controlled monopoly like we almost had in 2015. That would have been bad too. It's more like a kind of controlled monopoly. It's still a light touch. Like there's a few more players, but the barrier to entry, is so exceedingly high that it's not really, and there's permit limits. So, there's one dispensary that's going to be serving like 100 square mile area so that nobody can encroach on that. So that stuff I think could even change earlier, than 5 years, just from ballot initiatives, which I know people have been, drumming that up. I kind of wished it was present for the 2020 election, just because I think there's going to be high voter turnout and almost everybody is pro cannabis. Yeah. So, but it doesn't look like that'll happen in this state. But yeah, my concerns with Ohio were medical only. You have this kind of strange monopoly system with people who set laws who don't understand them, like the provision that you cannot smoke cannabis for your therapy. You can vaporize it. That's fine. Don't smoke it. It's impossible to stop somebody from doing that. They literally dispense flour. I'm speechless, but I went to those like town halls, and the logic was, look, there were some people who were not going to approve this unless we put this measure in place. And it's like, why though? It's unenforceable.
Right.
So,
like just words on a page. Like,
yeah. I mean, I don't think that combusting cannabis is always the most healthy option, but there are reasons somebody would do it if because it hits your bloodstream super fast. Vaporizers are fine too, but you're just kind of, I don't know, if you have this libertarian stance, which some of the people who made these decisions do, it's kind of like against that. So it's just surprising. And for that reason, other rules like these different producers have to produce a certain amount, like that's in their provision. They've got to do it. So what happens if you get hit with like mold or aphids or something? They can risk losing their license if they don't still put it out. They're going to be encouraged to make like higher yielding, growing higher yielding cultivars instead of these nuanced ones that might be better for specific ailments. So you don't see the variety here that you would elsewhere. Again, that is due to the way that the laws are written. So I guess in Ohio, I'd kind of like to see us try something different. The one thing Ohio likes to say is that we're the only state who legalized cannabis without a ballot initiative. It was our state Congress who did it.
Yeah.
So like there was a political maneuver involved, but technically that is true. And yeah, that's a positive. Like somebody who's progressive minded, that's kind of who you want your governing officials to be. But this case, there's just a lot of moving parts and a lot of confusion among the public, and the results are not patient forward.
Yeah.
So I don't like that, and that's why I'm gonna be helping and advocating for changes to that when we get the next ballot initiative, unless something happens federally
Mm-hmm.
to be a game changer before that.
Yeah, gosh, that is so fascinating. So there's this incentive to not only reduce diversity, but potentially push product out that's lower quality. Um, are there testing requirements in Ohio?
Yeah, there are.
Hmm.
But hilariously, they were a little behind. For example, when the Farm Bill passed, um, they did not have any testing facilities in place to test for the THC,
Oh,
and they so for a few months they were directed to not arrest anybody for cannabis because they couldn't prove it wasn't hemp. Uh,
yeah, I think that Texas was in that same similar situation.
yeah, um, but yeah, there are testing requirements. So obviously, if like a bud is lousy with mold,
Mhm.
that would fail. But there's a lot of ways to kind of circumvent
Yes.
a disaster in the garden that does not make a better product,
Mhm.
you know. And plus, it's okay to fail. Like, oh, we had this, this huge problem with the grow and we lost 80% of our crop. Let's make some tweaks to our grow operation. It won't happen again. Now we're better off for this. That's how
Yeah.
businesses work. You don't need to punish them on a permit level,
Right. Right.
for
Exactly.
like violating their terms of service or something. Um, that's just not. I just don't see why that's helpful. I think the reason was they wanted to make sure the supply was available.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Then you give out more permits. Let's let the market kind
Right.
of decide.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, we see in pretty much every state that legalizes, there's always this wave that hits where the supply is often exhausted in the beginning because it's a new thing and more people are
Yeah,
going to show up all at once to buy it. But then it normalizes,
yeah,
and to an extent. I mean, in Oregon, there's this debate over whether or not we have an overproduction problem, and some people
right.
on one side of the issue say that that's a sort of a mistaken perception because the quote unquote overproduction is a lot of like low quality material that shouldn't be on the market anyway, and then other
Yeah,
people that disagree with that, but that's an interesting perspective. And yeah, you don't ever want to create a situation where a cultivator is having to think about, like, okay, we've got this material that really isn't great, but we really need to get it to market just so that we can stay in business because of,
hmm
just that sort of like permitting rule. It's a really awkward dynamic to create. And yeah, it's not good for the consumer. That's for sure.
yeah. And the consumers in Ohio know that.
Yeah.
I spoke with a few of the growers in this region of Ohio, and I want them to succeed. And these are people who are largely hired by the owners and stuff. Like
Yeah.
the master grower is not the one who owns the business,
Yep.
because again, like $4 million buy-in or whatever. So this one guy was just expressing frustration. He's like, "Well, we just delivered our first batch of product to the dispensaries," and I was like, "Well, how'd it go?" And he's like, not great. Pretty much everything had seeds in it, and
Uh,
it's just like,
yeah.
I know you didn't want that, but you're on a
Right.
timeline, aren't you? So
Exactly. Yeah. Got to press forward. Hope for the best for the future.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, that's fascinating. Yeah, and the what you're talking about, the buy-in cost, that reminds me of like 2014 or 15 or so when Florida's they passed some legislation, but the bids for permits, it was in the millions of dollars. So you had like four people that applied, uh,
yeah,
and there was all of this political influence involved and everything as far as who got those permits. And um, yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's kind of nice though that we have this patchwork of legislation in the United States because we can learn, we can
hmm
see the different ways that states are trying to go about things and try to like you said, on ballot initiatives or whatever, try to synthesize, the best of all of these different ways of legislating and try to come up with a better system. And California's in this weird situation because they did that. They looked at the ways that Oregon and Washington and Colorado were regulating things, and then they kind of went like to an nth degree of precaution. Their rules were pretty restrictive in trying to protect quality and consumer safety and everything. And now there's a debate there of how should they loosen up and how loose should they get. And so it's fascinating. And then Oregon was sort of like in the middle. They did things a little tighter than like Colorado or Washington, but now they're trying to tighten things more these days, especially on the testing, because that's what I've been the most involved in with the testing labs and everything. But it's fascinating. We'll have to keep our eyes open to see what more states do. And it's unfortunate, though, that when you realize the system's bad, that you have to wait so long, to get some hope of change. It's like, oh, great,
Right.
wait 4 years, or like for a ballot initiative, like, great, now we got to go collect how many signatures and try to make sure that it's on there. But yeah, it's going to be a process. I'm excited. Mississippi has a ballot initiative this year for medical.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's a weird situation. They got so they got all these signatures to approve what seems to be a pretty reasonable medical law, and then the governor at the time fought it tooth and nail, and the health department fought it, but then it got on the ballot. So their response was, well, we'll create alternative initiatives that people will vote on that'll be far more restrictive, but when you read the descriptions, they all seem the same. And so essentially kind of confusing the voter so that they don't know which measure they actually like put their signature to and supported. And so I see those types of games going on too. That's unfortunate.
Yeah, that is unfortunate. They did something like that in back in 2015 when we had our ballot initiative. There was a second initiative right below it that basically blocked the one before it.
Right. Yeah.
It's like so. And actually, that one wasn't a bad one. It was basically like, we shall pass no law that grants monopolies or something.
Yeah.
And it's like, all right.
Sounds good. Okay.
Yeah, which it does. Yeah. I mean, we don't really want that. So.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Well, I know we've been going for over an hour now, so I want to try to come back around and give you a few questions to start to close us out. I really appreciate you being willing to talk for so long today.
Yeah, sure.
It's been great. One kind of simple question I wanted to ask you is, when it comes to the posters, what has been your favorite one to put together?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll just rattle off two.
Sure.
One of them is an infographic. The other one was like a really fun collaboration. So the infographic that kind of stands out as being fun to me was the history of cannabis as medicine timeline.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So it basically is a timeline of major discoveries or moments in cannabis history where it had been used as medicine throughout time, and it goes back like 5,000 years.
Yeah.
So I loved that it's so rich in like Judeo-Christian history and Ayurvedic healing and traditional Chinese medicine. I mean, people always, you even see t-shirts of this, like how old alcohol is and fermentation and all that. Cannabis is just as old, if not older.
Yep.
Has it had human trials? Well, it has been used with humans, cultivated by humans, bred specifically by humans for almost longer than any other thing.
Yeah.
So that's what this one kind of captures. And I just love that from like the optics of it. People don't realize how old it is. They think like oftentimes like it was maybe around in the 50s, but it was something that, people would do in maybe the 60s. At least in America, that's kind of a common belief.
Right. Yeah, it's the beatniks and the hippies.
Yeah, and you'll sometimes see like those old like bottles of like, Dr. Birkinshaw's hemp miracle something from like 1898 or something. Yeah. But Yeah, and honestly, that could have been better medicine than whatever else he was selling too.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, I just love that. Doing the research was pretty fun, and it's kind of rewarding to show that to people who are very religious
Mhm.
and who use their religious beliefs as a reason to be uh, opposed to cannabis.
Mhm.
Now, being opposed to something because you think your body is a temple is one thing, but saying that it has no merit and it has no place in history is just factually inaccurate. Like, there were technically, like Jesus Christ
Mhm.
was an advocate and user in some extent of this type of material for ceremony.
Yeah, like
Is what
anointing oil.
it's what they would Hebrews would use. So I think that's just really really fun to talk about. So it's like conversation starter. And it is kind of an outlier with our like line of prints, which do kind of normally focus around the science of it. This is more like the history. So that one was cool. The other one I really liked doing was kind of a newer one. We did this this travel series where we wanted to. You've seen those like vintage travel posters
Sure,
of
yeah.
like Paris and
Yeah, yeah.
whatever. So we wanted to do some that were underhandedly like cannabis related. So
Mhm.
it's not like big bold big weed plants cannabis. It was like you're like, oh, that's a cool vintage looking print, and you get closer and you're like, wait a second, this is about cannabis.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted. Like that's the approach that I wanted. Like draw them in and then show it as being like normal and just like it's always been here. And the one I'm thinking of in particular was the Southern California one because we worked with an artist that I've always loved. She's from Argentina, and she did this like Where's Waldo type thing where there's folks on a beach, beautifully illustrated, but there's like I think 22 or 24 hidden uses of cannabis in there.
Wow.
The people are not hiding it; they're not like being secretive, but there's like a shape of like a geometric pipe in the hillside. So there's all these like little things to find and stuff. And we actually did a collaboration with Last Prisoners Project with that print, and that's something we'll do too. Where all the proceeds we make, we are earmarking those to donate to a charity. Last Prisoners Project is one who kind of fights for people who are still wrongfully imprisoned for cannabis. Maybe the laws have changed and those people have not been released yet.
Gosh, yeah.
That's what they work on. And I really love that. The SoCal print is definitely like socially geared. Which is also sort of a new subject for us. It talks about the social elements of cannabis rather than like the health or wellness portions. So it felt right to kind of pair that with a charity that is active in like the social political side.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I didn't have to do a lot of design on that one, but it was really cool to kind of work with our art directors and Eugenia, who is that artist, to kind of do something new for us.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And even getting into the the cultural societal side of things, we often don't think of that as science, but I mean it is sociology.
Sure.
It is still kind of in that vein. It's something I'm sort of struggling with because so many people that I interview, just because they're in my circle, tend to be like doctors or researchers or something. But I have been branching out my interviews, and I got someone asked me recently. They were like, "Aren't you a science podcast?" And I'm like, "Well, one, the podcast is about exploring critical ideas and questions about cannabis and everything. But I mean, culture, society, stigma, all these different things. I mean, that is still science. It's just maybe not how you normally think of it.
Yeah.
But but it is part of this grander picture. I mean, how people are relating and interacting with this plant and in its many forms, and the whole idea of what's happening to people in prison is something I think about a lot, because I think about all of the people from Mississippi that I know growing up that got arrested, have dealt with records. I have a friend of mine that's been uh, so one thing that's big in Mississippi, and maybe it is in Ohio too, are late night checkpoints. They call them sobriety checkpoints, but the main reason that people get into trouble in these checkpoints is usually for cannabis, because of the smell. And so I have several friends of mine that have been arrested. That the cops, once they've been arrested, they start to get targeted, and so they start to get pulled over a lot, and basically getting harassed. And then there's basically areas of Mississippi they can't go to anymore because they know that if those cops are still working there, that if they see them, they'll get pulled over and get hassled.
Wow.
And I think about people that one of the things that we need to, I think, talk about a lot more when it comes to changes to cannabis law is expunging records, letting people out. It's something that there are some states that have started to try to bring that in when they change their laws, to try to change people's records and everything, but it's not being talked about nearly enough. And it's something that I think for some people, especially like out here on the West Coast, there's a very big cultural difference that I'm still getting used to, where people out here are so accustomed to the risk and the overall like acceptance of cannabis in the culture, that they don't even really have to think too much about like, what would happen if I got caught with a half gram of cannabis in my car? Like that's just not even something that's in their mind. Whereas in Mississippi, that's something that people live with, like their whole life could be ruined over something so small. One of my friends got arrested just for a pipe. He didn't even actually have cannabis in his car, but because he had paraphernalia, went to jail for that. And so it is something I think that needs to be talked about more. So it's great to hear that that Goldleaf is working to support nonprofits that have those sort of intentions. I didn't realize that before talking to you, but that's really, really awesome. Really glad to hear that.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, no, totally. And final question before we sign off here: what's kind of on the short-term horizon for Goldleaf?
Yeah, so this, I guess, this next interval of creativity that that we're dealing with is we're kind of circling back to the cultivation side a bit and doing. We're going to be kind of refreshing some of our botany work and our scientific illustrations. So we've got these like infographic card packs that are kind of like a nice like companion to any of the journals. They're, quicker to kind of reference key things that would be important to you. And so we're finishing up a new kind of pack for cultivators that has a lot of like cool infographics and information and metrics about things that growers often want to see. And then with that, we've got some new illustrations that we'll be releasing. So these will be informative. While there is like illustrations and artwork, they are kind of meant to be kind of more static learning tools,
Sure,
rather than like the Eugenia Mello piece I mentioned earlier. So yeah, that's where we're going to be spending some time. Those take a while to develop, just because they're all kind of hand drawn. We use a couple different illustrators, and it's just kind of a longer process than some of our other artwork that starts and ends inside of a computer.
Right. Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah. Well, that's exciting. I look forward to seeing all those updates and everything. And
Cool.
one thing that I'm hoping to do soon is I used to have these workshops that I would teach that were like 8 weeks long and kind of designed to be kind of like college level before there were college classes on cannabis. Now they're starting to pop up everywhere. But I'm wanting to re-engage those. So one thing I'll be looking at is some of your materials to see what I can integrate into some of my classes and everything. So we'll be in touch on some of that.
Nice. Yeah. Reach out.
Yeah, totally. So at this point, I'm going to kind of hand the platform over to you. If there's anything that we haven't talked about that you want to make sure listeners hear, feel free to say it. If not, just let people know where to find Goldleaf, where to learn more about you. If you have a social media presence or any of that, just go ahead and plug yourself. The platform's yours.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. The best place to kind of see what we do is our website. You can go to shopgoldleaf.com or goldleaf.org. Takes you to the same place. On social media, I really enjoy our Instagram and Pinterest channels just because they're the most visual and the most kind of fun for us. So on Instagram, we're at Goldleaf without the O, so GLD.
Gotcha.
LEAF. And Pinterest, it's /Goldleaf _
Gotcha.
Yeah, and those are two kind of fun spots for social media stuff. I have kind of mixed feelings about social media, but I do like the visual elements and stuff. So I'd recommend checking us out there. I also do some writing for Green Entrepreneur. So if you have a business and you're interested in like some of the design and digital side of stuff, we have some cool articles on that platform. I think those are the big ones. Thank you, Jason.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and it's cool to talk to someone else that is in a different state, like Ohio, that's dealing with all of those changes. Very fascinating, and a pleasure to meet you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you as well. Thanks so much.
Yeah, totally. So those listening or watching, if you want to learn more about Curious About Cannabis, you can go to cacpodcast.com. All the episodes and information about our contributors and everything are there. And you can also find us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for Curious About Cannabis. You should be able to find us. And also check out our YouTube channel, and you can find clips and full-length interviews like this. So thanks so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. Stay curious and take it easy. Bye-bye.